For years, Zara Tindall remained the royal family's calm in the storm, quiet, grounded, untouchable. But now, with one unexpected statement, she shattered that image. In a rare and explosive reveal, Zara has spoken out, and it's not about horses or tradition. It's about her children, and why they were never allowed near Prince Harry's kids. The silence is broken, and nothing will ever be the same. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For most of her life, Zara Tindall existed in a space few royals ever managed to occupy. She was close enough to power to understand its dangers, yet distant enough to avoid being consumed by it. She didn't chase titles. She didn't fight for relevance. She didn't speak when others turned interviews into weapons. That restraint earned her something rare inside the monarchy: trust. Senior royals confided in her, the public respected her. Even critics of the institution often spared Zara, seeing her as proof that quiet strength could still exist within the royal machine. That's why her words landed like an earthquake. When Zara finally broke her silence, it wasn't calculated, rehearsed, or softened by palace language. It was personal, it was maternal, and it cut straight through the carefully maintained illusion of unity surrounding the next generation. What stunned insiders most wasn't that Zara spoke, but what she chose to speak about. She didn't reference politics, press battles, or old family wounds. She spoke about boundaries, about protection, about a deliberate decision she and her husband had made years ago, a decision that quietly reshaped family dynamics long before the public ever noticed. When she referenced Archie and Lilibet by name, it sent a chill through royal circles. Not because of accusation, but because of separation. Zara didn't express anger. She expressed resolve. An emotional wall, built brick by brick, not out of spite, but out of fear, instinct, and something far deeper than personal dislike. Those closest to her say the shift didn't happen overnight. They describe a slow tightening, a gradual pulling inward, as Zara became more guarded, more selective about who her children were exposed to and why. Invitations were declined, visits quietly avoided, conversations redirected. At the time, it was dismissed as scheduling conflicts or lifestyle differences. But her recent words reframed everything. They revealed that what looked like distance was actually design. A conscious line drawn long before the world started asking questions. And once that line was acknowledged, publicly, its implications became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just about cousins growing up apart. It hinted at fractures running through the royal bloodline itself, divisions rooted in loyalty, legacy, and unspoken fears about the future. Zara's confession forced everyone to re-examine old assumptions about who belongs where, who can be trusted, and how far a mother is willing to go to shield her children from a family war they never chose to inherit. But Zara's stunning declaration didn't come out of nowhere. It was born from a history of broken promises, fractured bloodlines, and one night that changed everything. What looked like distant politeness was hiding years of mistrust. Behind the scenes, Zara and Meghan never connected, and insiders now claim their dynamic was anything but neutral. Beneath every royal photo op was an unspoken tension, one that would eventually erupt into maternal fury. From the moment Meghan stepped into the royal fold, Zara watched in silence, not with judgment, not at first, but with instinct. She had seen outsiders enter the monarchy before, some with grace, others with ambition. But something about Meghan unsettled her, not out of envy or rivalry, but because of what she represented. Meghan moved quickly, too quickly. Titles were accepted, roles were redefined, and suddenly the fabric of tradition, the very thing Zara had spent her life quietly preserving, felt under threat. At dinners and public events, their words to one another were brief, civil, but never warm. There was no sisterhood, no bond, only observation, and Zara was watching closely. Zara's protective instincts were never loud, but they ran deep. As Princess Anne's daughter, she'd been raised to value legacy, discretion, and above all loyalty to the bloodline. Meghan's entry, with its whirlwind pace and boundary-shattering intent, clashed with everything Zara had been taught to protect. But it wasn't just the speed, it was the attitude. The quiet comments, allegedly made by Meghan in private, suggesting that some members of the family coasted without doing the real work, that some non-working royals had no place at the table. Whether those words were spoken in frustration or strategy, they struck a nerve. Zara, unbothered by spotlight but fiercely loyal to the institution's heartbeat, took them personally, and while Meghan made headlines, Zara turned inward. She didn't challenge publicly, she didn't leak or retaliate. Instead, she distanced slowly, deliberately, and in ways only those closest to her could detect. Invitations were ignored. Playdates that might have been organized were quietly dropped. To the public, it seemed like two women on different schedules. To insiders, it was a line being drawn silent but final. That line deepened every time the Sussexes gave interviews, published letters, or made disclosures about the firm. For Zara, it wasn't about airing dirty laundry. It was about sacred boundaries, and once crossed, she never allowed re-entry. The breaking point came during a private family event, one meant to symbolize unity, a christening where every royal was expected to show face and reaffirm loyalty. Meghan attended, Zara was there too. But she didn't bring her children, not out of logistics or timing, out of principle. It was the first outward, undeniable signal that she had made a choice. The moment was brief, almost unnoticed, but those who saw the omission understood. Zara had made a quiet statement that echoed louder than any confrontation, but even deeper than personal dislike was a revelation that sent shockwaves through Zara's world, something whispered behind palace doors that made her draw a hard line around her children. King Charles had kept it buried, a secret that, if unearthed, could splinter what was left of his family. But when Zara found out, everything changed. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about blood, legacy, and a truth she could not unlearn. It began with whispers, subtle, easily dismissed, the kind of murmurs that hover in royal corridors and vanish before they're traced. But to Zara, they didn't feel like coincidence. Something was shifting behind the curtain, and it revolved around the Sussex children. What was initially framed as reconciliation began to feel more like re-engineering, a quiet recalibration of the family's future, designed behind closed doors. The king, still reeling from public fractures, seemed determined to hold on to his fragmented dynasty. But the way he was doing it, that was what made Zara's blood run cold. She learned, through a source too trusted to doubt, that Charles had been making private overtures to ensure Archie and Lilibet retained symbolic proximity to the crown. Not public roles, but quiet entitlements, spiritual posse. Sheening in the royal narrative, the discovery didn't come all at once. It started with a set of letters, red-stamped, deeply personal, exchanged between Charles and Harry. They were never meant to be read outside of their bubble, but Zara saw them. Not all, just enough. Enough to catch phrases like cementing bonds and ensuring generational balance. Enough to notice a chilling mention of godparent roles being considered, not for tradition but for optics. What horrified her wasn't the attempt to reconnect, but the calculated nature of it. It wasn't reconciliation, it was strategy, and in that strategy her own children and their standing were being used as potential instruments. Then came the file, a redacted document, buried in succession analysis paperwork, left exposed in a room she wasn't meant to enter. There were names, scenarios, hypothetical adjustments to the line of inheritance under unforeseen circumstances. Zara wasn't naive. She understood every royal plan has contingencies. But seeing her children's names paired with Harry's, coded with risk assessments and PR impact statements, crossed a line. Her children weren't variables in someone else's legacy correction. They were her blood. And suddenly, everything became personal. She waited until she had Charles alone. No aides, no titles, just daughter and father's heir. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She asked one question, is this true? He looked at her for a long time, then said 6 words that haunt. Ed her more than a lie ever could. This is beyond you now, Zara. In that moment, something in her shifted. Her loyalty, once tethered to tradition, broke free. What had once been a quiet compliance transformed into steel resolve. She would not let legacy swallow her children whole. From that day on, Zara's instincts no longer bent to protocol. They aligned only with protection. No more silent nods, no more inclusion for the sake of unity. She would not pretend, and she would not comply, because what she saw behind that veil of secrecy wasn't just a father's desperation, it was a monarchy willing to gamble its future with a deck that included her children as pawns. Still, this wasn't just a matter of blood. Zara's silence was shattered because her mother's voice had echoed in her mind. Princess Anne had warned her long ago. Princess Anne rarely speaks and even more rarely interferes. But when it came to Zara's children, she made one thing clear. Not all royal blood is created equal. Her cryptic warning would become the very foundation of Zara's refusal. It happened not long after Harry and Meghan's final departure. The air inside the palace had shifted, not cold, but cautious. The family was still raw, still adjusting to the public unraveling of their own. In the middle of it all, Zara turned to her mother, seeking clarity. She wasn't asking for approval, just understanding. And Anne, as always, didn't waste words. "You protect what is yours, not what is royal," she said. ID. It was a line that pierced straight through the etiquette, straight through the noise. It was the kind of advice only a mother who had fought her own battles in silence could give, and it stayed with Zara, echoing through moments she didn't yet realize would define her. Anne's place in the firm had never relied on public validation. She didn't need the spotlight. She was the matriarch in the shadows, protective, watchful, and unafraid to call out the rot before it spread. She saw in Meghan a disruptor, not a threat necessarily, but a spark one that didn't care what it set ablaze. While others danced around the Sussexes' choices, Anne didn't bother. She didn't speak publicly, but behind closed doors, she questioned everything. Their pace, their personnel, their shifting standards of privacy. And when it came to the household staff Harry and Meghan brought into the royal orbit, Anne's suspicion turned into quiet resistance. She reportedly refused to let certain aides near her grandchildren, citing instability and lack of vetting. To some, it sounded paranoid. But to Zara, it sounded like instinct. And instinct doesn't need to be polite. One particular moment cemented that instinct forever. Charles, in an effort to bridge widening gaps, had once suggested a quiet afternoon at Highgrove. His vision was clear: George and Archie together, cousins bonding, symbolism restored. Anne refused, flatly. She didn't raise her voice, but her decision was final. She would not pretend that shared blood guaranteed shared safety, not anymore. That moment replayed in Zara's memory often, not because of the rejection itself, but because of what it symbolized. Anne wasn't fighting a PR war, she was defending a legacy, and when she saw blurred lines, she drew them sharper. Over time, Zara began to notice her mother's old warnings transforming into personal truths. Little things started to bother her more. The staged moments, the performative family unity, the way silence was expected, demanded, even when instinct screamed otherwise. Anne's voice, once background noise, became the filter through which Zara saw everything. Meghan's charm, Harry's contradictions, the firm's desperation for healing, none of it could drown out that one line: "You protect what is yours." Zara never expected her decision to cause this much pain. But the more she looked at her children, the more she knew the choice had been made long before she consciously realized it. Her refusal wasn't born of resentment, it was born of memory. The memory of a mother who had taught her that protection was not negotiable, even in the House of Windsor. But it wasn't until Zara's own children asked one simple question, one that involved a photo and a lie, that her decision became irreversible. Sometimes it only takes a child's innocent question to detonate a hidden war. Zara's daughter had pointed to a photo and asked a simple, devastating question. The lie Zara told in response solidified a choice she had been wrestling with for years. The moment came without warning, one afternoon, calm and unremarkable until it wasn't. Zara's daughter, flipping through an old family album, paused on a photograph. It showed a smiling Archie, barely a toddler, caught in the brief period when he was still wrapped in the royal fold. She stared at the image, then turned to her mother and asked, "Are we friends?" Just 3 words, no agenda, no history. But the silence that followed was deafening. Zara froze. She felt it rise, that storm of explanations, caution, regret, and instead she offered a soft, automatic, "Yes, darling." The lie left her lips before she could stop it, and immediately she felt the weight of it settle into her chest. That moment tore something open, not because of the question, but because of what it revealed. For all her strength, all her resolve, Zara hadn't prepared for the moment her children would ask about the very people she was keeping them from. The cousins they didn't see, the birthdays they never attended, the faces they only knew through stories too carefully edited. She remembered every decision, the Christmas invite they declined, the christening they never attended, the carefully worded responses to avoid suspicion. And now, that tapestry of avoidance had unraveled with a child's curiosity. In the days that followed, Zara and Mike spoke in hushed tones. No blame, no second-guessing, just quiet, mutual understanding. Mike had never pressured her to include Archie and Lilibet. If anything, he was the one who, years earlier, had sensed the danger of blurring the lines between family and performance. His words remained unspoken but firm. "We raise ours differently." He had seen how volatile things had become, how everything, even family ties, could be weaponized. So when Zara shared what their daughter had asked, he didn't flinch. He only nodded. Because sometimes, love meant creating distance. From that point forward, something shifted inside their home. The Tindalls didn't retreat, but they didn't play along either. While others in the firm continued the balancing act of public unity and private tension, Zara and Mike stopped pretending. Their household became its own fortress, one where tradition existed without obligation, where blood meant protection, not proximity. Friends noticed subtle changes, fewer joint holidays, quieter birthdays, a growing distance that felt intentional, not accidental. The press didn't pick it up at first, but inside the palace it was noted, and not all were pleased. Still, Zara didn't flinch. Her rebellion wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It echoed in the choices she made, who her children saw, where they went, and what truths they were told. That quiet defiance became her way of saying no. No to the games, no to the illusions, no to a legacy that didn't know how to protect its own without devouring them. And while Zara had chosen silence for years, one event at Balmoral, surrounded by legacy, portraits and ghosts, forced her to finally speak. In the cold marble halls of Balmoral, legacy weighs more than truth, but this time, truth won. Zara, backed by nothing but her resolve, confronted Harry and Meghan. Witnesses say the room froze, and what she said left Meghan in tears and Harry speechless. The annual late summer gathering at Balmoral was meant to be quiet, reflective, and above all, controlled. It was tradition, the kind that binds fractured bloodlines back together under the illusion of unity. But beneath the formality and rehearsed smiles, tension simmered. Zara had not spoken publicly, nor privately, about the rift she had quietly nurtured for years. Until now. The tipping point came not with fanfare, but with a whispered comment overheard in the corridor. Meghan had made a passing remark, perhaps unaware Zara was within earshot, questioning why their children were continually left out of family events. It wasn't phrased with malice, but with injury. And to Zara, it felt like a line being crossed once again. Sympathy being spun from silence, truth reshaped as exclusion. Enough was enough. Later that afternoon, Zara found them alone in the library, a room steeped in history, where generations had buried secrets and brokered peace. But there would be no diplomacy here. Zara walked in with her voice steady and her decision final. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She simply stated what no one else had dared to say aloud. "You turn children into leverage," she told them, her words sharp with heartbreak. "You've made your pain our burden, and I won't let mine be pulled into it." Meghan tried to speak, tried to explain, to soften, but Zara cut through the apology with a line that would later ripple through the palace. "Your fight is yours. Leave mine out of it." Harry's face reportedly drained of colour. The weight of it hit him before he could form a defence. This wasn't a political disagreement or a generational clash. This was a mother drawing a boundary in blood. And the silence that followed was the kind that echoed long after the words stopped. Meghan, caught off guard by the bluntness, reportedly turned away in tears. Whether from guilt, shock, or humiliation, no one could say. It was the first time anyone had openly confronted them without the buffer of palace protocol or media caution. And it came from the one royal who had never played the game. In that moment, Zara stood entirely alone, no aides, no senior royals by her side, but the room wasn't empty. At least 2 high-ranking members of the family were said to be present in the adjacent hallway. They heard it all, and they did nothing. No interruption, no rescue. Their silence spoke volumes. It was as if the firm itself had silently authorized this, reckoning a release valve on a pressure system that had been ticking for too long. But Zara's fury wasn't only personal. She was protecting something far older, far deeper, and far more sacred, the bloodline. To outsiders, all royal children wear the same crown of legacy. But inside the firm, lineage whispers louder than titles. Zara's decision wasn't just about loyalty, it was about blood. And in her mind, her children carried something that couldn't be risked. Beneath the polished family portraits and televised smiles lies a truth the public is rarely permitted to glimpse: that not all royal children are seen as equal within the monarchy's inner sanctum. For Zara, this wasn't a matter of favoritism or politics. It was about the threads of lineage, the currents that run beneath the titles and define the very identity of the royal institution. She had been raised to understand the importance of bloodlines not just by surname, but by legacy. Her children carried the blood of Anne, the daughter who never sought power but guarded it fiercely. It was a lineage forged in duty, silence, and unwavering loyalty. And to Zara, that meant something sacred, something that had to be preserved even if it came at a cost. On the other side of the royal divide stood Harry's children, Archie and Lilibet, beautiful, innocent, and yet in Zara's eyes swept into something far bigger than they understood. Their bloodline, while royal, was braided with another legacy entirely. Diana's defiance, Meghan's disruption, the public war against the institution. Zara didn't see them as enemies. She saw them as casualties in a battle their parents refused to stop fighting, and she couldn't allow her children to be collateral. There was a phrase Zara and Mike had begun using privately: the bloodline firewall, a conceptual line that kept their children insulated from the chaos surrounding the crown. Not a wall of superiority, but of protection. Mike, blunt as ever, had once summed it up during a closed-door conversation with a family aide: "We're not part of the show, and we don't want to be." It wasn't disdain, it was distance chosen and fiercely guarded, and Zara clung to that clarity like a lifeline. She believed in raising her children without confusion, no blurred roles, no conditional acceptance, no shifting narratives. The monarchy was complex enough. The last thing she wanted was to entangle her family in someone else's storm. And Harry and Meghan's narrative had become a storm, unpredictable, media-fueled, emotionally charged. Every photo, every statement, every silence carried a message. And Zara refused to let her children become part of that message. In her eyes, Archie and Lilibet didn't represent malice. They represented instability, the kind that disrupts structure, blurs lines, and ignites tensions that never truly fade. It wasn't personal. It was maternal. And it wasn't about exclusion, it was about survival. For her family, for her peace, for her children's understanding of who they were and who they were not. But just when Zara thought the storm had passed, a royal photographer captured a moment that reignited the fire and exposed her stance to the world. One photo, a smiling group of royal cousins, and 2 absences that screamed louder than any headline. When the image was posted and later deleted, speculation erupted. But Zara didn't flinch. The silence was her message, and it hit harder than any public statement. It was meant to be private, a quiet, sunny day at Windsor. Cousins gathered for an informal picnic. No press, no agenda, just family. But in the age of instant access and blurred boundaries, privacy is an illusion, even behind the palace gates. A junior staff member, unaware of the storm it would unleash, uploaded a single photo to a closed network account. Within minutes, it leaked, and once it did, there was no stopping the wildfire. The image was innocent at first glance: children laughing, games mid-play, a glimpse of rare royal normalcy. But what wasn't in the frame spoke louder than what was. Archie and Lilibet were not there. The reaction was swift and unforgiving. Social media ignited with accusations. Some cried sabotage, others claimed calculated cruelty. Headlines followed, each more explosive than the last. Royal bloodlines divided. Zara's icy silence. Cousins cut out. Every outlet had a theory, and none were gentle. The Sussex camp remained quiet. But their silence, too, was interpreted as hurt, as anger, as wounded confirmation of the rift many had long suspected but never seen laid so bare. For Zara, it wasn't just noise. It was a public trial without defense. Her choices made behind closed doors for reasons she'd never explained were now dissected, mocked and weaponized. Inside her camp, the debate was immediate. Advisors urged a response, a clarification, a softening of the edges. The photo wasn't curated, they argued. It wasn't exclusion, it was circumstance. But Zara wasn't interested in managing optics. She knew the truth, and more importantly, she knew why that truth mattered. To her, silence wasn't avoidance. It was armor. It was dignity. She wouldn't justify protecting her children. She wouldn't apologize for drawing lines that others refused to see until they were crossed. The deletion of the photo came quietly, hours after the leak. But the damage had already been done, or perhaps the revelation had simply landed. What the world saw as cruelty, Zara saw as consequence. She hadn't made a spectacle. She hadn't launched a campaign. She had simply chosen not to bend. And when the reaction came, she didn't hide. Because in that storm, her decision, once personal and private, became unavoidably public. The monarchy had long depended on silence to erase discomfort. But this time, Zara's silence was intentional. It wasn't silence to erase. It was silence to assert. And those who understood the weight of that choice stood quietly behind her. Lines had been drawn now, not by decree but by exposure. And as the firm scrambled to preserve balance, one thing was clear: Zara was no longer on the sidelines. Her refusal to explain had become a statement in itself, a declaration that not all traditions were worth preserving, and not all questions deserved an answer. And just when the firm expected her to retreat, Zara stepped forward. One interview, one microphone, and no regrets. Zara Tindall has always been the royal who stayed above the noise, until now. With cameras rolling and questions burning, she delivered a calm, devastating message. No anger, no theatrics. Just a simple truth: she did what she had to do. For years, she had kept quiet, not out of fear, but out of choice. Zara understood the currency of silence in the royal family. It shields, it protects, and when necessary, it punishes. But this time, the silence had become its own weapon, and she was done letting others wield it for her. The interview wasn't flashy. It wasn't orchestrated by palace handlers or broadcast with royal pomp. It was controlled, intimate. And in that setting, Zara delivered the blow that stunned even her critics. She didn't offer apologies or reframe her past. She didn't retreat behind formality. She spoke plainly. "I will not let confusion into my children's lives," she said, her voice even but final. That sentence, so simple, carried the weight of every decision she'd made over the last 5 years. She didn't attack Meghan. She didn't accuse Harry. She didn't need to. Her words weren't aimed at anyone else. They were a declaration of autonomy, of motherhood, of resolve. She explained with striking clarity that her silence had never been passive. It was her line in the sand. She had chosen not to respond to provocations, not to engage in headlines, because her loyalty wasn't to the public's curiosity. It was to the 2 young lives she was responsible for shaping. And that meant keeping them away from a narrative she no longer trusted, one that twisted facts, blurred boundaries, and fed chaos into childhood. Behind the scenes, the reaction was swift but muted. Princess Anne, ever the unshakable force, reportedly sent a quiet message of support, not grand, not dramatic, just a few words that only mothers like them would understand. William and Catherine, whose own family had endured relentless scrutiny, were said to nod in silent agreement. No statements, no headlines, just quiet solidarity. It was the kind of royal support that mattered most, not the public kind, but the kind that shows up in rooms no one photographs. But the silence from Harry and Meghan was louder than anything they could have said. No comment, no rebuttal, no defense. Their team remained unavailable for response, fueling speculation that the message had landed, and landed hard. Public opinion, as always, split down the middle. Some accused Zara of cruelty, of reinforcing the royal walls that Harry had worked so hard to dismantle. Others hailed her as the only one with the courage to protect family without broadcasting pain. But through it all, Zara didn't flinch. She didn't need to explain herself again. She had said her truth, and that was enough. And as the firm moves forward, the message is clear: this was more than personal. This was a statement, a line drawn, and a silence that roared across the monarchy. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.